All right, Rebecca, thanks so much for being on this podcast. I appreciate it. First off, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the work that you do today, that'd be great.
Sure, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be having this conversation with you. Yes, I'm Rebekah Taussig. I'm a writer, and I do a lot of public speaking and a little bit of consulting work, but mostly I see myself as a writer who works in the arena of disability, motherhood, life in a body, and what it means to live one entire life tethered to one single body and mind. And I write a lot about the kind of both and tension in some of those experiences and intersections. So I can't see it on the Zoom screen, but I do move through the world in this wheelchair and have since I was really young. I got my first wheelchair when I was in first grade. And I would say that for a lot of my early years, that experience didn't mean very much to me. And it was, I'm the youngest of six kids in my family, and I kind of always was just one of the pack. I didn't know very many other kids with disabilities. Um, and it was kind of over time, um, over a lot of decades, that I started to piece together that disability meant something in the world that we live in, and it meant something to the people who would interact with me, and it meant something. There were some parameters of my life that were different than my siblings. Um, and a lot of my friends, but I didn't know what to make of that, or I didn't have language to understand that experience very well. And so it took me a long time and a lot of reading later in my life to start to understand, oh, like this is the particularities of my experience, or these are some things, these are some metaphors or some lenses or some language that help me understand what it feels like to move through this particular world in this particular body. And so that really fueled a lot of my writing, and led to eventually a book that came out in 2020 called Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body. Um, and yeah, it keeps on unfolding and unfurling, and there's a lot of questions that come up when you move through the world this way. And I think, since since having that book published, I've had the opportunity to meet with lots of people, in person and virtually, mostly in the US, but across the globe, who have all different kinds of disabilities. And that's really led to sort of more exploration and questions for me and new things to consider and write about. So, yeah, none of it is fixed or static. It feels like it's a set of questions that continue to unfurl. And those questions really fuel me as a writer.
hmm And so, for the basis of that book, was that based on like your experiences as someone with a disability, or like how did you envision writing it?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, the seeds for that book really did start on Instagram, which is a platform that I have conflicting feelings about. It's talking about both and the social media space I feel conflict around that. But yeah, back in 2014, I which feels, wow, it's so long ago now. I started an Instagram account where I really wanted to document, for myself and for anyone paying attention, what life in a disabled body, or this particular body with a disability, feels like, and the textures of that experience. And so I started writing like little tiny stories or mini memoirs about that experience of disability. And that would be anything from like accessibility to like romantic relationships to representation and storytelling, and so I started writing a lot about those topics online, and over time, I ended up connecting with a literary agent who was like, "Would you want to actually expand these tidbits of writing from your POV into a book?" Um, and by that point, I think the edges of the Instagram space were starting to feel pretty cramped. It's like, I think, I don't know what it is now because I'm not there as much now, but it's like 2,200 characters that you could put in this caption. And so, yeah, at that point, it felt like I would like more space to really move through these topics. And so the book follows, I think there's 8 chapters in the book, and each one tackles sort of a different topic within the world of disability, particularly from my point of view. Um, there's a whole chapter on, I used to teach high school, so there's a whole chapter on like teaching high school and bringing disability into that space. Um, and there's a whole chapter on like disability and feminism, which was a very tricky chapter for me to write and try to grapple with and understand. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the origin of the book. It started with these little tidbits online and sort of grew out of those seeds.
Mm-hmm. What was difficult? Was it the writing part or like coming up with like, how do I fit in my experiences into this one book? Because there are a lot of different experiences that you tackle. So what was your writing process like?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I had been writing much longer. Uh, I'd been writing a lot before that book. Like actually, um, I went to my undergrad and my graduate degrees are all in creative writing, and so that was sort of an arena that I felt kind of comfortable in. So I think what happened when I started to uncover a lot of this experience of disability and sort of thinking about it more critically, it really felt like just this what is the metaphor? What are the words? It felt like this overwhelming urge and almost like compulsion to write about these experiences. So I think really the way I think about that book was that it just sort of like tumbled out of me. It was like I'd been writing for a long time, but I hadn't written about disability. And so once those two things overlapped, it was like I couldn't hold any of that inside of me anymore, almost like a baby that needed to be born or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really written in sort of like a flurried, it felt to me like this flurried sort of tumbling out of me experience. Not to say that that wasn't challenging, but there was just so much that I wanted to process and understand. Um, but I was also writing it while I was teaching high school. And so for anyone who has been a high school student or a high school teacher, just the pace of that world is pretty relentless. And so I was writing it in the cracks of like my weekends or like winter break or like the little extra spaces I had. So that was probably part of why it felt flurried too, is I was just doing a lot at the time. But yeah, I think a lot of it just sort of tumbled out of me. There was a lot I wanted to look at, and I had sort of been building the skills in writing. So it was just sort of meeting the experience with the writing skill. It was right time, right place. It felt like these stories needed to come out, and sort of that's how it went.
Mm-hmm. So you also taught high school? What sort of what sort of grade level? What sort of group?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I taught freshmen in high school and seniors in high school. So I had sort of the bookend of, and before I was teaching high school and during my graduate studies, I taught college freshmen and then a couple of upper level college classes. So I've had a pretty big range of ages that I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, when I was teaching undergrad, I had some students that were quite a bit older. I had a wonderful student that was like in her 70s. So I guess I've taught the range from like 14 to 70. And there's things to love and unique challenges about any of those ages. But yeah, I've taught a pretty broad range of people.
Mm-hmm. What was that in creative writing?
So yeah, some of it. Um, some of those classes would be creative writing. When I taught freshmen, it was just sort of a general freshman English class. So you're teaching students about, how to write a paper, how to make an argument in writing, how to read critically, how to, identify a theme and character arcs and things like that. So some of that is more general English skills. And then seniors in high school, the school I taught at, you could design your own course. So I did a disability and literature class for one of my senior groups. We did, I can't remember the name of it, but I think complicated bodies was another course that I taught to high school seniors. And then I led them through capstone research projects, so kind of following them through a big idea and figuring out how to research that idea and kind of contribute to that idea. And then in college, yeah, it was also a range. I taught introduction to fiction, introduction to creative writing, introduction to creative nonfiction. Um, Actually, I think it was just introduction to creative nonfiction. It's been a while. I've
Hmm.
taught, yeah, under
Yeah.
the English umbrella, I've taught a lot of different subjects.
What would students tell you, like when they took your classes? What would they tell you?
Oh, about what?
What, you know, because they took classes with
Uh-huh.
you and their
Uh-huh.
experience. Yeah,
Oh, you mean like their experience of the course content or their experience of me, or what do you, uh,
their experiences. You know, taking classes with you because
oh,
you
with
taught.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a range, right? There's so many different dynamics within the classroom. I mean, I loved teaching, and if I can figure out a way to make that rhythm work again, I haven't been in the classroom since my son was born. My son's 5 now. Um, it was really taxing for me too, but I loved teaching. So I think for a lot of, I hope that for a lot of those students, it felt like an experience of like mutual enjoyment and a lot of learning. I know I learned a lot. I mean, it's a cliche, but I always learned a lot from my students, and watching them learn and grow. And I think one of my favorite parts about teaching is always that experience of being in a room with such a range of experience and perspective, and being able to dig into a dialogue where we land somewhere that we probably wouldn't have landed on our own. Like I love that kind of experience. So a lot of my classes were really like dialogue driven and wanting to hear all the voices in the room. So I hope that students experience that the way that I experienced it, which was quite positively.
hmm Now let's talk about your work in the disability advocate space. You know, what is that like? What do you do in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I see myself is predominantly as a writer. So I think a lot of the work that I do is bearing witness to, on the one hand, my very particular experience of disability and being able to really witness and narrate kind of the complexities and the difficulties and triumphs and joys and frustrations of that life experience, so that I can contribute to this body of writing that we have on disabled bodies. I think, not I think, I know that for a lot of human history, the experience of disability has been narrated by people who don't live that experience. And we see the ways that disability is represented kind of one dimensionally or within tropes in literature. And so wanting to participate in creating nuanced representations of disability in the world. And then I think, and wanting to contribute to those stories in lots of arenas. My book, my memoir and essays, I think we would call it, came out in 2020. I had a picture book come out this year in 2025 and was able to co-write a screenplay for a film that will come out next year. So wanting to like really participate in the world of storytelling and how we tell stories of disability in the world. I think that since, and as I mentioned just a bit ago, since my book came out, I have had the chance to meet with so many more people who have experiences of disability that overlap and deviate from mine in really important and interesting and worth our attention ways. And so I think part of what I have in mind as I write now is sort of the balance of that of recognizing the particularities of my experience, and when it feels fitting and appropriate, being able to try to speak to larger experience of disability. Like more recently, I think, like this year, it felt important to me to write a piece on um, Section 504 and some of the legislation that
Hmm.
was being under attack, and wanting to really make people pay attention to this, right? Like, I think historically, when we think about stories of disability, I don't know, I think there are ways that these stories get overlooked or flattened. And so, really wanting us to not overlook them, but to give them the respect and attention that they deserve and the urgency that they deserve. So there are a lot of things that can fit under that umbrella. But I guess at the heart of it, I just I want to amplify that and add nuance to the stories that we have access to in representing disability.
Hmm. I had a guest on recently, and she's a parent of someone with dyslexia, and so she talked about how in the disability space, there's sort of this culture of shame of like seeing disabled people as, shameful, or like there's a lot of pity or
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So like what's sort of your take on that, and how do we sort of shift the mindset, if you will?
Yeah, I think my impression is that a lot, even today, and I think that this has changed over the decades, and it can continue to change in either direction, I suppose. But I think what I have seen a lot of is disability as represented and understood as like a really separate category of people. Like you have the non-disabled people over here, and I think a lot of people would think of those people as the typical people. And then you have this sort of separate category of disabled people. And I think you're right. There's a lot of shame and pity that's often associated with the category of disability. There's also, and I'm assuming that you've experienced both ends of the spectrum, because there's also a sort of like um, inspirational trope that can be attached to that category of
Yes,
people,
yes.
right? And that sort of like other superhero sort of quality that is distinct from this group over here. So there's this sort of like othering and distancing of the category of disability and a human life attached to disability. And I think what I feel really um, called to feels like a lofty phrase, but like what is feels important to me is to uh, sort of I don't know, bridge that gap or call to our attention that the experience of disability is incredibly common. It moves in and out of the human lifespan. It's actually quite ordinary, and not everybody has a body just like mine or yours. But the experience of disability and all that that word can mean is incredibly human, and it's intrinsic to the human experience. And so, when I think about my experience of disability, I honestly, I see plenty of things in my life that are worthy of like inspiration or pity, I guess. But it seems like in the same way that every human life is, like there are things to pity about and triumphs in every single human life. And I think that the ways that these themes might move through the life of someone with a disability aren't categorically different than any other human. And so to me, I think what I feel really pushed to and what I like speak on a lot is how ordinary this experience is. And because disability moves in and out of our lives and families and communities with such frequency, with such commonality, it's really important for us to build a world that includes disability. It's important for us to um, be thinking about infrastructures and support systems that can hold a human being from birth to death over the course of a lifetime that will inevitably have disability moving in and out of that experience. So I guess part of that is like humanizing this experience and showing the nuance of a life that includes disability. I think a lot of times um, we can get in these sort of like back and forth trying to pull the narrative back from the one dimensional notes. And I've felt this in my own life. So like um if somebody is going to like put a story of pity over my life and feel really sorry for me, my impulse is to be like, no, don't pity me. Like, my life is great. Like, what are you doing? Or the reverse, if somebody just looks at me and they're like, oh, you're so inspirational. My impulse is
Hmm.
often to be like, hello, my life is hard. And look at all these reasons that things are inaccessible to me. And this is crap. So I think over time, what I find myself drawn to is like trying to let go of that push and pull of trying to control that narrative in one direction or the other and just insist on the complexity and nuance of every human life. And I am not different from that. And the person across from me is not different from that. And can we look at all of that together without this like weird categorizing separateness that we have done for so long? I mean, it's fundamentally undeniable that if someone lives long enough, they will experience disability. That is not like debatable. I've seen that happen in my own with my own parents as they've aged, and I know that they don't use that language to describe themselves, but that is what's happening. Um, I think the idea that some of us are disabled and some of us aren't is just such a fiction that punishes everyone. And if we can look at the breadth and depth of humanity and build the world to include all of us, then we all benefit. So that's kind of my spiel. That's what feels important to me these days.
Yeah, the whole inspiration thing, I get that a lot sometimes. I don't
Yeah.
understand it. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why people revert to that way of thinking, but
Yeah.
yeah. But my next
Oh, sorry.
go
No,
ahead. Go ahead.
you good.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I think the inspiration thing is interesting. And I also find myself often annoyed, and then it's difficult. It's like you, sometimes it can be difficult to explain why it's annoying because people are like, why don't you want people to think you're amazing? Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with that? And I think that part of it is for me, when I have experienced that sort of like, oh, you're so inspirational, you're so amazing. Part of it is like, I feel like you're not actually seeing me at all. And you're not seeing like the reality of my everyday life. But I think also part of it is like, if you think I'm inspirational, some of it has to be because you're seeing that I live in a life full of inaccessibility or barriers of some kind, and you're like proud of me for overcoming them. When actually, I'd rather you work on like um, fixing those barriers so that I don't have to be inspirational when I overcome them. So there's some of that tension too.
So kind
But
of put on a pedestal.
totally, yeah. Yeah, and I think it's complicated because I think there are plenty of disabled people who do inspirational things. And so how do you weigh like when like when it feels all right to applaud a person with disability and when it doesn't, and that's going to be personal and individual. But there are a lot of things that are problematic with just like the impulse, the automatic impulse to um, apply that label to a person just because of this category you perceive them to be in. So.
hmm So my next question is, tell me a little bit about the what you've learned in doing this kind of work, with the book and disability advocacy and all that stuff.
Oh my gosh. Leslie, so many things. Where should I start?
The book. Let's start with
Yeah,
the book.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in writing it, um, I think when I wrote it, it felt very important to me to insist that this was just my experience, right? Like I'm not speaking for an entire group of people. This is like I'm going to really drill down on and bringing to life the very particular experience that I have had with disability in the world. And that felt important to me at the time. I think since it's come out and I've been lucky enough to interact with people around it, I think it has been even more clarified to me both the things about this story that are universal and the things about this story that are particular. In that, I think there are a lot of more people that resonate with this story and from one direction or another than maybe I expected them to. There were things that were relatable to more people than I expected. And also, I've seen the ways that there are people who have very different experiences of disability than I do for a lot of different reasons. They have different feelings about it. They have different histories and arcs um, and even when someone has a disability that's relatively similar to mine, there can be a lot of things that are different about our experiences. So I guess both of those things feel true to me of just seeing like, wow, when you really drill down on the experience of disability from an embodied place and kind of bring some of these scenes and moments to life, it resonates with a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And also, the experience of disability is so vast and personal and
hmm
different for everyone. And I've felt both. I've seen both of those things be true.
What about in the disability advocacy space? Because the first person that comes to mind is the late Judy Human. She was a great disability advocate.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. And the fiercest. I mean, like did you ever have a chance to like, um,
I haven't met her. I
Yeah.
haven't met her, but
I did a little bit. I moderated a panel she was on one time, and somebody in the Q&A asked a question, and they used some language that she didn't feel was quite right. I can't remember what word they used. And I will never forget the way that she just like swiftly got in there and was just like, okay, so before I even answer your question, this is the language you should be using and this is why. And she did it in such a like sturdy, firm way, but like a generous, warm way. It wasn't like you're the worst that you did this. It was just like, oh, you didn't know. Let me just correct that. Let me just get in there real quick and correct that. And it was so interesting for me to witness that that way that she had of you know challenging people in a way that felt um, like an invitation into something. It was really impressive to me how she did that. Um, she she really had her she really participated in like changing the world in very tangible ways. I mean, and her whole coalition. She was incredibly gifted at building coalitions and bringing people together. Um, and I know there were a lot of big players that worked with her as well. But you're right, she's awesome. And I think um, when I you have this question for me about disability advocacy, and then I'm like, you conjured Judy Human, and I'm like, I don't even feel like I'm in the same arena with someone like Judy
yeah.
Human. Um, but I think what Judy did, and I wrote about this after she died, which was so shocking and heartbreaking. Um, but I think one of the things that Judy did, thinking about the time period she was born in. So she's like growing up in 1950s Brooklyn and thinking about what the world looked like in 1950s Brooklyn. I mean, have you read her memoir, Laszlo?
I have not. No, I have not.
You're gonna. It's so good. And you can listen to the audiobook too. It's awesome. I think you would love it. But for anyone who doesn't know this history of Judy, she grew up in a city where um, the public schools didn't want her to attend. They didn't feel like they told her mom that her wheelchair would make her a fire hazard. So they were basically denying her entrance to this public school where her brothers went to school. And so she lived in a world where that was commonplace and expected, and there was no path of like legal recourse to fight that school's decision. And her mom was an incredible advocate and really pushed for Judy to be included in the world. And there's lots of examples of that in her book. But I think about what it's like to grow up in a world like that, where you know, all these people in power around you have co-signed this idea that yeah, it makes sense for a kid with disabilities to not be able to attend public school. Like, yeah, send her away. They'll figure it out as a family, or like where that was sort of the assumed norm, and what it feels like to be a person who grows up in that world. I mean, because I was born, what, like decades later, and I was 4 when the ADA was passed. So the world I grew up in was notably more accessible and inclusive than the world that Judy grew up in. And yet for me, I still really struggled to feel like I belonged or that I had a right to, be anywhere. I had a really hard time causing disruption. I didn't want to like make a fuss about anything, and Judy was like totally fine making a fuss and believed and knew that she and all the other, kids in her other kids with disabilities deserved to participate in school like any of the other kids did. And so I just marvel over her audacity, her like deep knowing of that belonging. And I think one of the things that she did was push that belief and that deep knowing in our right to belong out into the world, make that tangible, kind of push that narrative into the mainstream world in some way. Um, And so now, when I don't know about the guest that you had with the son who has dyslexia, but thinking about like now we have a lot of parents in the world who also believe, yes, my kid, regardless of what their disability is, my kid deserves to be educated just like any other kid. We have
Hmm.
that belief in us. And I think Judy is a big part of that. Um, there might have been, I'm sure there were parents in the 50s who also believed that, but there are more of them now. And there's more legislation to back that belief than there was in 1950, um, in the 1950s. So I think when I look at Judy, I think that a big part of what she did was affecting legislation and the built world. But I think I'm thinking a lot these days about just putting that belief into the world that a person's disabilities should not exclude them from participating in their communities. Um,
Hmm.
and I feel like part of what I hope I can participate in is keeping that belief alive, in affirming that belief in all of us, and not letting us take that for granted, not letting us let that kind of wash and fade away. I think this needs to be in the foreground, of the world that we're building together. And yeah, that feels important to me.
Hmm. What can be done to sort of make things more inclusive, accessible? Yeah.
I mean, oh, a lot, a lot. I think that like sigh that you heard from me, is just the fear that I have of losing the ground, the bit of ground that we've gained, right? So like part of
Uh-huh.
it is holding on to what already exists. Um, like I mentioned with the Section 504 legislation, I think part of it is holding on to the provisions that we already have and making sure that those are not eroded or diminished. Um, that there are people that are holding schools um, and institutions accountable for being inclusive feels important to me. Um, that can also feel really daunting for the average person to think about how we participate in that. And so I also think about just like the on the ground, within an individual school or within an individual workplace or individual friend group, how do you make things more inclusive and accessible? I also think about just the way we um, show up for each other in our small bubbles of community. And I know that for me, um, anytime that anybody is on the lookout for what my accessibility will or will not be in any given space feels like a bit of a warm embrace, right? Like not having to be the only one who's trying to be vigilant on the ground, but having my friends and my family on the lookout to say like, I looked ahead at the venue and this place doesn't have accessible bathrooms. Do you want to go somewhere else? Like that kind of person who's going to show
Hmm.
up and be thinking of that. Um, on the lookout for that. I in the book I have one chapter that is specifically on the complications of kindness, and the ways that we think about sort of these roles that we have assigned, sometimes without thinking within a society, that disabled people need non-disabled people to come save them and be their heroes, and kind of what that can look like sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think the way that we've imagined that is often about like these individual moments of swooping in and saving someone. I think that's much less helpful than being on the lookout for um, infrastructure and built spaces and kind of thinking about a person's experience. Um, I think that one of the examples I give is like being at a restaurant, and I'm trying to reach for the straws that are out of reach. And it's one thing for someone to be like, "Oh, let me get that straw for you," and like hand me the straw, versus being like, "You know what? Those straws are in a place that a lot of people can't access. Let's figure out a different system. Let's figure out a different way for that
Hmm.
setup so that next time you come to this restaurant, you can get that straw yourself." That's a small example, but something like that, I think, on the ground, thinking about what a ongoing experience we might have in a certain space is part of the work too.
Mm. Okie dokie. All